and welcome back to Friends Like Us. This is a video that we're doing for you, for our Patreon subscribers. It's just for you. So since we last spoke, we were behind the news, but now we're up to date. We're caught up. But there's no way of ever being caught up nowadays because hot topics happen every second, right? So far we've had Father's Day, and that's going to be the most recent episode, is the Father's Day episode, where we talk about what it's like to reconnect with your father. Do you have a good relationship with your father? Do you not have a good relationship with your father? You know, where's your daddy? I know where my daddy is. Well, my daddy is gone. But my daddy was a good man, and we're going to talk about the complex relationships of that on this episode of Friends Like Us. Yay! And you know what's really sad about Father's Day is, as we know, on the border, we have almost 2,000 children separated from their parents from the immigration. I don't want to say law, because it's not a law, but it's a new, I don't have the terms, but it's new bullshit that Trump has put into play. He's blaming the Democrats, but he's actually lying to the Americans about that because this is a policy. There it is. It's a policy that he put into play. So it's a very sad situation that we have going on. But my question to you is, do you think that Trump cares about these children? Do you think in his heart of hearts that he's just so cold that he doesn't care about these children? Or do you think that it's actually a policy that went wrong and he needs to fix it? That's my question to you. And it says here, this will be the update. Trump, he says that it's criminal exploiting kids at the border. This is what he's saying now. So he's issued his strongest denunciation of it regarding the separation of immigrant children from their parents at the U.S. border and demanded that it stop. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it's a sober Father's Day. Sober Father's Day. Because, you know, as we know, John Legend called out Jeff Sessions, and he called out Paul Ryan. I was about to say Ron Paul. They're the same white man to me. But, you know, basically called out Paul Ryan on his Father's Day. And he said, you know what? Fuck you. Also, what I want to say is when you go to our Patreon page, you have options now. You can be an acquaintance or you can be a friend. Now, an acquaintance means that you just get background information, you get updates on who's coming, you get more of an insight as to our guests, who's going to be that month, and what is going to be talked about on that episode. And you'll get several articles, blog, how I feel about the podcast, what's going on with me emotionally. Because as of last week, I went back and forth on Twitter. I'm not too proud of myself, but I went back and forth on Twitter with someone who had a complaint that was, I would say, fair. But, yeah, I was like, your critique is wrong. So I went back and forth. So I'm going to be talking about that on the blog if you're an acquaintance. Now, if you're a friend on our Patreon page, you know what you get? You get this video right here. And you get more. You're going to get more interviews. You're going to get more one-on-one interviews with our guests. So if you become a friend, that's what you get. And you will see at what cost. But you can donate whatever you want to Friends Like Us. If you believe in supporting the podcast, if you've listened to this podcast for, I don't know, we've been here for 4 years almost now. So, you know, you could chip in $1. It's like giving a tip, you know, like that homeless guy that's on the subway. We're not homeless, but, you know, it's like we're not tap dancing. We're putting out a product for you. So just give whatever you want. Not a quarter, though. $1. At least $1. Okay, so I want to read this friendly email from someone who came out to my show for Single Black Female this week. So as you know, I do the podcast to promote women of color, and I also promote myself. So I want to thank all of the listeners that did come out to the Fat Black Pussycat here in New York City as part of the Comedy Cellar, where I did and worked on an hour. It was the best show And it's mostly because of you, because of the people who come out to the podcast from the podcast. They know me. So they know the stories. They get to see how the stories on the podcast develop on stage. And I want to thank this person, Tammy. She wrote me, "Hello, Marina. Really enjoyed your show last night. I'm so glad I attended. I was supposed to attend your show in March, but my father suddenly passed away the day before. And last night, you made me laugh. Haven't laughed like that since my dad's transition. I walked around most days in shock, so it was nice to feel something other than the loss and sadness, so thank you. I am also a fan of Friends Like Us. You're giving people of color, especially women, a wonderful platform. I appreciate your authenticity. And you were so kind to me last night. I know you've lost your father, and you know that pain. So I want to say, Tammy, thank you so much for coming out. Your words, coming up to me after the show and saying what you said to me, it helps me to keep going. So I appreciate you, Tammy. And having you in the audience helps even that much more because you get it. So thank you, Tammy. I also want to thank Charlie, who came up to me after a show that I didn't do so well. I actually had a show in the village, and it wasn't a great show because I was dealing with my cat. As everyone knows, my cat's going through a lot right now, and I have to give him injections. So I was talking about it on stage, and I was a little emotional. And Charlie, you came up to me after the show, and you were like, listen, I've been listening to the podcast since day one. I love your work. I know what you were doing on stage. People don't get it, but I do. And you said you were listening to the show since we had Sade on the show, which is way back. Sade we called her Angry Baby. So I really appreciate the fact that you came up to me after that sort of lukewarm set that I had and said, I appreciate it. So thank you, Charlie. Thank you. So you came out to the Fat Black Pussycat to see Single Black Female. I am going to be doing an hour soon. So that's news. That's going to be coming in hopefully September. If you keep following us on Patreon, you will get the exact date of when that is. But yes, Marina Franklin's going to be taping an hour. Woo! Yay! Now, we did have someone on our Twitter page that got upset. And I will say there was some going back and forth. And if you listen to our podcast, if you follow us, and you should follow us on Twitter. We're Friends Like Us 10 on Twitter. You can help defend us, actually. Fans, get involved on our Twitter page. Become more interactive. We'll talk to you. We'll even argue. Okay? But the person had some problems with the beginning of the podcast where I referred to how Keisha can't read. And for those of you who listen to the show, you know that when I read, it's bad sometimes. And you know what? There is an actual question of whether or not I could be dyslexic. I don't know. But in interviewing my guests, in the first 2 minutes, I mispronounced their name. And I made the joke of, I oftentimes can't read on the show. I'm not dyslexic, but I can't read. This person wrote me called me an ableist by saying that, making that joke. And my question to you is this. If a person says, and I get this part of it is, if you say, hey, I'm not retarded, yeah, we don't do that anymore. And I get that completely, 100%. I get that. But if you say in a sentence the full scope of the conversation, if you say, and in that moment I was serious, I was saying, I'm not dyslexic, I just have problems. The joke was, I just have problems reading. That's where the funny part was. But again, in order to dissect this for you, or for someone like this, they like to listen to a podcast and take apart every little thing and attach some type of meaning to it, which is fine. But I just went back and forth with them and said, I'm not doing that, and you need to stop taking things out of context. This person's name is, let's see here, on Twitter, Cardiotomia. Cardio, Cardiotomia on Twitter. Miss Fruger. They're white, by the way. They're white. And they had a lot to say about the podcast where we're addressing transgender issues, a transgender individual on our show of color who would like to be referred to as they. So one of our regular guests on the show, Khalees Hawkins, accidentally referred to they as he, and this person found it offensive. And the thing is if you listen to that episode, you will see that Khalees, number one, apologizes, corrected herself, and asks a question, honest question, because Friends Like Us is really about creating dialogue, asking questions, being honest, because if you don't ask questions, how else are you going to know? And the thing is, her question was, honestly, if I look at you, how am I supposed to perceive? Is it okay if I make that mistake? When I make that mistake, I don't mean it to be an offensive thing. I'm not trying to be a bad person. I'm just trying to find out what's going on. Anyway, this person wrote, okay, let's see. Let's start from the beginning of this person. You know what? And I shouldn't go back and forth, but I wanted to represent our brand as. So this person wrote, and I appreciate you, Duck It Lord, the Daily Darren. Friends Like Us 10, this week's episode was everything. As a trans artist of color myself, it gets disheartening to see there's so few resources and interviews out here about people like me. So thank you. So there's the positive thing, right? So I have to be honest when I get even like one critique from someone that's in the opposite way, it makes me not want to do it. But when I see someone write something like that, it makes me go, okay, I'm doing the right thing. Keep going. But I just think that's something that needs to be out there, is that you should know if you are an individual that likes to be referred to as they. I am an individual that wants to encourage the dialogue. I want to encourage the conversation. I want people to feel like they could be human in their mistakes and correct it, because even I've gotten better. Like, I'm so good at it now. I deserve, actually, not an award, but I'm good at it. I'm just saying I've gotten much better and I'm proud of myself. So this other person, Sierra Keys, wrote, we live our lives to be, palatable or palatable? Palatable! Thank you. We live our lives to be palatable. And that's why we're depressed, because we don't actually know who we are on our own terms. That was a quote that someone took from this past episode. And I like that. Yeah, I can't say the word palatable, but I like it. And the person says, Sierra Keys wrote, I've heard this episode like 5 times already, which that's 5 hours. But I do encourage you to write in. I think the most useful thing about this interaction, and Khalees went back and forth with this person too, is at the end of the day, the person came back and said, thank you so much, Khalees, for correcting me. I am now following you as well. So hey, look, it can happen. You can have a war on Twitter over information or misunderstanding, and it can come to a good place, which it did. So that's what it is. That's what friends do. They argue, and then they come back to a good place. That's why I created this platform, because it's friends like us. Here's some quotes that you can live by. Alok, who was our guest, who likes to be referred to as they, said, It is, for me, Pride is not just a month, it's a lifestyle. So this is Pride Month. So this was perfect to have Alok as a guest. Also, what they said was, what I've learned is that they want our narratives to be digestible. But what part of us is finished when we're done being consumed? Good stuff. And this is another very important one to sum up everything from our Twitter page. I'm really about women of color and trans people of color crying in public, because I don't think we're allowed vulnerability. And I think we're required to be strong all the time. Very important. Do you cry, Jay? See, you need to cry more. But that's the thing. Let's break down that myth of the strong black woman, you know. Yeah, we've gone through a lot, but sometimes it's okay to be vulnerable. You know, I know these arms can fool you. I know you think this means that I'm strong. I'm strong here, but not here. Not here. Okay, and yeah, this is the Pride season is a moment to talk about false equivalencies. You being uncomfortable about grammar is not the same thing as me fighting for my life. And the reality of the situation is that people like me are dying every day because people like you think that we're men. I was never a man. A gendered system that was created by white colonizers to divide people of color to fight amongst themselves made you believe that I was a man. I've always been outside of it. So that's something that Alok, that was new to me. That was like a very serious quote where I had to listen to it and just kind of dissect it and think about it. I don't know if I completely, agree 100% about colonization and looking at a man versus a woman. Colonization I think of more as black, white, But I do understand that every day Alok walking out onto the street has to be looked at. And people will take pictures and attack and spit. And there's a high rate of suicide for transgender individuals that needs to be taken seriously. I mean, we just had in the news, we had Bourdain who committed suicide and Kate Spade who committed suicide. So this was a very relevant conversation about that and bringing it back home to people who we forget have a very high rate of suicide. So it's an important conversation to have, especially during Pride Month. So I'm glad we had it. I'm glad that's the type of podcast I'm producing nowadays because I think here's a place where you can be a little ignorant, And when you are ignorant, we correct it. Ignorant, by the way, I think people don't like to be called ignorant because it makes them feel like they're a bad person. Ignorance just means you don't know. I've been ignorant several times on the podcast, and I own that. But by owning it, I also correct it and fix it. And I think that's the most important thing about this podcast is these are real people having real conversations. And so a lot of times they'll say the wrong thing. Okay, so I want you to remember to follow us on Friends Like Us. Follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. And you can also go to my website, marinafranklin.com, and you will find it there too. But most important, tell someone you know to check us out and go to our Patreon page. That's Patreon, Patreon.com/Friends Like Us. And you could become an acquaintance, or you become a friend, or you become a best friend. And we'll figure out what price that is. So there it is. Thank you so much. Bye-bye until next time. Which one is it? Palatable? Palatable.